What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with the one, the only, my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We are here to talk about NBA teams that could potentially look dramatically different next season, because that's just an interesting topic this time of year. There's still games going on. The playoff races are being covered, but we just did a bunch of sophomore stock reports, took a look at, player values to each team. This feels like a good exercise to go into right now, especially with Grant. We've reached kind of that point where we're removed from the trade deadline by about a month. And so now all these rumors trickle out about the trades that didn't happen or the things that were happening behind the scenes. So it's also somewhat topical there. But first and foremost, how the heck are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, and I would like to point out to anyone concerned that if Dan and I yell at each other, it's a sign of a good relationship, because that's what Kevin Durant and Mike Budenholzer have taught us. That's how you can tell if you're really getting along well, is if you constantly scream at each other in public.
Look, I fave it. That's fine, which clearly means that we despise each other, because we don't have honestly, the biggest disagreement we have might have come on the previous podcast when we talked about Brandon Podziemski and Jonathan Kuminga's value to the Warriors long term.
Could be. Well, who knows? Maybe something will happen today. Maybe we'll finally.
We're still waiting for the day where you just get irate on the podcast. We're all just waiting. So when we were building our list here, and so the way to work is we have like kind of the primary candidates list, and then we each chose a dark horse that we'll talk about at the end. And then there'll be, assuming there's time, I'll roll through a bunch of the super quick hitters and say, like, if this happens, could this team fall here? And then Grant will respond to see what he thinks about that. But when you were kind of cobbling together like our initial list, how did you what is the crux of this approach, especially when you're looking at teams that aren't always going to fall on the same end of the competitive spectrum right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we do have a pretty good, I'd say the list of our teams skews more towards winning than losing, or like pretty good right now. I think what mattered more was the intersection of like decisions that are going to be foisted on them, for reasons outside the team's control, like just contracts expire or like player options come up or whatever, how that intersects with, to draw it back to the KD Budenholzer thing of like the dynamics within the team just suggest like something's got to give. So like the interior and exterior forces just like nudging the team towards being pretty different next year. What I didn't focus on as much is like, well, how easy will it be for them to be different? And we'll talk about that, because one thing that these teams don't have in common is just like their level of flexibility and like how easy or hard it'll be for them to, to undertake the kind of changes we're talking about. So yeah, it's mostly just like, if you had to look at the teams this year, like how many forces are sort of pushing them to look different? I guess if I had to make it as neat as possible. Is that how you approached it? Like, or was it more like, did you lean one way or the other harder, like in terms of like, oh, this guy's a free agent versus like, so they got to do freaking something about the Suns,
I think I think at the top, it's heavily weighted by decisions, as you mentioned, that could be foisted upon them. But I actually more so kind of lasered in on, okay, teams that are they either trying to take the next step, or did they think that they took the next step and it's clearly not working, and there's been enough time to say that, okay, it's not working. Like, are we going to look for a pivot, or do we have news reported evidence that, oh, they are clearly looking for a change up? What I did struggle with, and we do have some of these teams in here, is to be an outright seller wasn't really something that I factored into the equation. There's one or two teams that might amble on to that primary tier that we're going to talk about, but I didn't okay, these teams might look a lot different, but if it was involved of, oh, they're going to move a lot of veterans, in my head, it was almost, were they also trying to take a step forward as well, to where the Blazers would be a good example, which is a team that I think we'll talk about, is okay, like, especially the way they're playing now, they definitely should be looking to move Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton, or Justin Ayton's injured at the moment, but like those are the two names you gravitate towards. But it's okay, well, how much of a are those the two? Even though if Jeremy Grant's going to play a ton of minutes, is he someone who's necessarily driving success for the Blazers? So I also tried to factor that in. Brooklyn, there's going to be turnover. Like, maybe they trade Cam Johnson, maybe they trade Nick Claxton. They're going to bring in a high draft pick, we think, but they're not a team that's going to make the primary tier for me.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
We begin with the Houston Rockets. I think the the way to approach this is they do have some decisions that are being foisted upon them. When you look at specifically the Fred VanVleet team option, they did just extend Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, so those salaries will kick in. And now you're thinking about extensions this offseason, or at least they're eligible for them, in Tari Eason and Jabari Smith Jr. And this is all juxtaposed against, okay, the Rockets are good now, but we've kind of like that Fred VanVleet injury, and then Şengün did miss some time. It did kind of spotlight the limitations of their offense, which we've all suspected all along. That all goes to say I could see this team not doing anything over the offseason because one, Reed Shepherd comes out and drops 25 against OKC's defense. The answer is right there. And
That's how
then
he gets you.
two, everything, a lot of these teams, it depends on, okay, well, what happens in the playoffs? We think that Houston's going to be a little vulnerable in the playoffs, but Grant, what if they go into the playoffs, they make the conference finals or something? Why, like, are you really going to say, oh, they need to make a consolidation trade right now? But for me, at least, I have them here because they have the assets. They're good enough to say, all right, we want to make that leap into authentic title contention. I could see them, maybe it won't be a bunch of moves where it's, oh, 4 different guys, or maybe it has to be because of whatever the package ends up being, but they seem like a team that should be on the radar. If there's this singular seismic type move made, they're among the candidates to pull it off.
Yeah, I think you can come at them from a lot of different angles. And it's not, I would note too, it's not just Jabari Smith and Tari Eason are extension eligible this summer. It's like the waves just keep coming like 2 at a time after that, where it'll be Thompson and Cam Whitmore. And then, like, by the way, Jalen Green's contract is so short, he's going to be eligible for an extension in like a couple of years too. And then Shepherd will be there, whoever that, so it is very much like, it's not urgent, right? It's not the same kind of, it's not like, oh my God, we have to consolidate now because we can't pay all these. I mean, that's partly true, but you do sort of need to make decisions. And that part of it, coupled with like where Houston is, the difference that like a high-end offensive engine could make if it's not Fred VanVleet. If Fred VanVleet is someone that you pick up the team option on to trade in a package for LaMelo Ball or Trae Young or whatever, like to get okay, we have the engine now that they really don't. Like there's all these different angles for it to take. And I mean, we can talk as much or as little about it as you want, but the Phoenix of it all with maybe Kevin Durant is the guy that they want to, plop in there to just super fast track the contention window. And you've got Phoenix's picks to send back, which we've mentioned a million times. Like, Devin Booker, there's no reporting just continues to go the other way that Devin Booker doesn't want out. We'll talk more about them later, but there's just a lot of different ways it could go for the Rockets. And I don't think it would be, well, what do you think it would be a mistake to make the consolidation trade or make the big swing this summer?
I want to see how the playoffs unfold, obviously. I don't think it would be a mistake when you get into someone like a Kevin Durant who can fit anywhere and is still incredible. The opportunity cost matters a lot to me, because if you're going to caps lock consolidate to where it's not just salary and then a Phoenix pick or two, if that's the if it's Fred VanVleet, a smaller salary, and then we're talking what, 1 or 2 of Phoenix's picks or just 1 or 2 picks in general to get Kevin Durant, I think that's worth the roll of the dice. But now if you're talking about giving up a couple of your youngsters in addition to even more draft equity than that, I think you want someone, let's use another member of the Phoenix Suns, on the Devin Booker age timeline. They're under 30. Preferably you'd want them even younger, but those guys, unless you're a big believer in LaMelo Ball becoming available, they don't really become available unless you're being run by Nico Harrison, apparently, in the ideal age bracket. So I think the Rockets are in an enviable position because they're open to anything. But if you look at it through the Kevin Durant's availability, if you're Houston, is that someone, just, he's still great. I want to make that clear, but knowing how old he is, and then, okay, yes, he'll presumably want to stay, but then also he's wanted to leave places somewhat quickly. Does that, how, I guess I sometimes feel like we exaggerate the importance of players on their timelines, but how much does it matter in this case with Houston if you're looking at it, Kevin Durant going into, age 36, age 37 campaigns?
I think it matters a lot. And it doesn't normally, but this is kind of an extreme case because of Durant is, what is Durant? I mean, he's been great this year. There's just no getting around it. So he'll probably be great next year. and maybe the year after that, I don't know. But I would, if it's me, I'd rather have LaMelo. Just if you got to choose which of the two to bring in, all things being equal, I don't know who would cost more. Actually, that's an interesting question. I'd rather have the younger guy that can just makes more sense in the timeline. Although I would grant you, like, we do overblow like the importance of that. I want to ask you, like, what percentage chance do you think Fred VanVleet is on the team next year?
That's funny because I had the same question. I did a similar question to you to say, what do you make of their intentions if they decline versus if they pick up that team option? So if you're planning on keeping Fred VanVleet, do you think it makes more sense to decline the team option and try and work out a smaller salary so that if you're building a midseason trade, it's just easier to work while stacking on top of others? And then if you're not planning on keeping him, doesn't it kind of make sense to pick up the team option and see if you could use him as that primary salary anchor? And
Exactly.
so the signifier for me would be if they pick up Fred VanVleet's team option, I will take that as evidence that they are going to make a pretty big trade. And that's not just like, and if they decline his team option, I will just assume that is because they're not talking about like trying to carve out a bunch of cap space then and go
Right.
poach free agent X. So I would take that as a sign, okay, they don't know what's going to happen and they're letting it spill into the middle of next year.
I totally agree. I think if he is back, it will be on a 3-year, $90 million deal, or something like that. Maybe a 2+1. If I'm Houston, I really don't want like a long-term commitment here. And if they do just pick it up, like I don't think you do that for any reason other than you intend to move him. I think like that just seems like the most logical aspect of it. And the reason I made me think of that is when, I agree it does make sense for them to see what happens in the playoffs. But what if what happens in the playoffs is VanVleet is just good enough as the like driver of offense to win them, I don't know, to make them maybe not a conference finals thing, but it's like it's clear that he's very important and he helps them get to game 7 in the second round or something like that. Like, how much like is that actually good? Because you didn't really learn anything new about VanVleet. Like, that's kind of the level you viewed him as being at. And now, you know what I mean? Like, it would be if he just was terrible in the playoffs, it would almost make your planning and decision making easier, because it's like, okay, he's not the guy. We need to use him to get the guy. But if he's like just pretty good, it leaves you in the position of, okay, well, maybe we can, more indecision creeps in if he's just, good enough.
See, and I don't think it would, just because we know the trajectory of aging for smaller guards
Right.
for the most part. And so even if he's spectacular in the playoffs, you're best player, you win a playoff series, take it to game 7 of the semifinals. I think you look at it and say, okay, well, this is fleeting to begin with. The bigger inflection point for me is, what is the internal view of Reed Shepherd?
Oh, well, I was going to say before we get to that, like, I think you're right about, so when you're talking about let's see what happens in the playoffs, I think what we're really saying is like, how good do Thompson, Şengün, Green, Jabari Smith, like how good did they look? You know what I mean? Like, you're going to get a lot more insight into what Houston may or may not do over the summer in terms of changing the roster based on how they look, as opposed to VanVleet. It almost doesn't matter like what VanVleet does, because he's a known commodity and you have all the built-in concerns about his aging curve. So like those guys are the ones that will, like, if Thompson is suddenly like, I don't know, he shoots 38% from 3, or like he just runs the offense really well, that would change things more than like literally anything VanVleet could do, I think.
I think if VanVleet is terrible, it might increase the urgency with which they operate over the offseason, because during his absence, 28th in half court efficiency. And so
Right.
if he's playing during the postseason and like those struggles are still persisting, it's almost like Fred VanVleet might do more to impact Houston's future if he's bad or the offense is really bad in the
Yeah.
playoffs, versus like the young guys matter more than anything. But I would just be curious, if Fred VanVleet is okay or really good and you have an encouraging playoff picture, I don't think that we kind of saw this with the Cavs this year. There is value at the trade deadline. They went and got DeAndre Hunter, even though they've been rolling the entire year. There's still value in trying to build on a good thing and taking swings. But that would then circle back to the question. My inflection point would be, well, what is the internal evaluation of Reed Shepherd? Not just
Yeah.
the player he's going to be year 5, year 6, but in year 2, because this team is young and also operating like within an immediate window as well.
Yeah, I guess it's related. Like if again that first start of the year and he goes for 25 and looks good, and Cam Whitmore goes for 27 and looks good, it's just like I think we got to start peeling off the vets here and just kind of see what's underneath if we let the younger guys play. Yeah, Van Fleet is bad. You need to have a pretty strong belief in Reed Shepherd at least being a rotation guy like regularly next year to move on from him. And then if you think more of Shepherd than that, like why are you trading for LaMelo or somebody like that? Because you just think, well, maybe Shepherd can be not LaMelo, but a good starter. Like he's drafted 3rd overall. You better still believe that about him.
I'll pose it to you this way. Do you think that they will wind up acquiring a new player who cracks their closing lineup next season?
I think so. And I think they'll do it by moving Van Fleet after picking up that option. I think that's because really like that doesn't, you still got a long runway with Shepherd. So if you go get the guy that, you kind of bring in ahead of him, if we just keep using LaMelo because I don't have any other great examples that really strike me as interesting.
Name anybody. Dallas is proof that it's valid. Name whoever you want. Steph?
Anybody. Steph, yeah. Darius Garland, just bring him in. Yeah, I think so. I don't know what the percentage chance I put on it. That's why I was asking you. Because if Van Fleet's gone, you traded him for the guy you're talking about that cracks the closing 5 probably. And it's like 51-49 though, probably in my estimation. Where are you?
I'd probably be. I think I'm a little bit higher on like they're gonna go get something with Phoenix just feels too obvious to me. Like it just feels like Kevin Durant or Devin Booker is gonna be on this team next season. But I will say, do you know what would be the gutsiest move? And I wouldn't hate it, to be clear. You get rid of Fred Van Fleet, and it's just right. Reed Shepherd's coming in, and we're just running it forward with these young guys.
In that scenario, are you just declining the team option?
Unless you could bring, because is he going to want to come off the bench for you? Because you're not going to demote Jalen Green and then start Van Fleet. I guess you could bring Jalen Green off the bench, but if you decide that Reed Shepherd is now the guy that you're going to start, my guess would be that Fred Van Fleet is leaving, right?
And you would trade him for something, and then maybe if you're trading a $40 million contract, like you're bringing something back.
If you were doing that, I was thinking that they decline Fred Van Fleet's team option, and you're saying don't let him go for nothing is the type deal.
That's such I mean, I guess they could, but that just doesn't seem to happen anymore, where you just decline an option on a really good player just because, I don't know. We've maybe moved past the whole preserve the asset mode of thinking, but I don't know. That would be a big example of going the other way.
Do they do something like they flip they pick up the team option, and let's say you flip him to Detroit and you're taking back Tobias Harris's salary. And so now you've rolled over that into a smaller salary slot for a less valuable player that you're using that's just the off the cuff example. I'm not campaigning for a Tobias Harris, Fred Van Fleet like swap.
That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing is you want him to come in and play over Jabari Smith. That's what I'm taking away.
Next team, the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is, we might be talking about them anyway, but I think it says a great deal that they tried to enter the Kevin Durant sweepstakes at the trade deadline per The Athletic. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it still is. I did appreciate we got like just the faintest explanation or answer to our question of like, so, but how? Because that never made sense. Like, what are they doing to onboard Kevin Durant? And it was basically like, they would trade a bunch of other players away to clear room so they could then aggregate. And it was like, okay, so this really did not get very far.
And that's totally easy to do in the middle of the season, right?
Right. It happens all the time. I do think, I mean, at the same time, we both, like everybody knows that some form of like mini reckoning is coming for them, whether it involves Durant and a big trade or not, just because of the free agencies that are staring them down. They are staring down the barrel of, and Julius Randle's player option and how those things interact, right? Like, so whether it's a big trade or not, like something's gonna give here this summer, one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it will depend on what happens in the postseason, of course. I just wonder if you're them, are you hoping that Julius Randle picks up his player option? Or you're hoping he opts out? Like, you're the Wolves. We know probably what Mark Luray and Alex Rodriguez are like from a financial, they'd rather him just opt out and they could probably let him leave. They'll pay Naz Reid. Maybe they keep Nah. But what it does feel like that if you want to make a trade, like a bigger trade, you want Julius Randle to opt in, because then there's that $30 million expiring contract to use as the anchor around which then you flesh out the package.
Yeah, so this is sort of like the Van Vliet situation in Houston, and also not like it at all, because one's a player option and one's a team option. So my first thought is I would want him to opt out, because then you have a pathway towards keeping Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and staying under the second apron. I think that's the quick and dirty math is like, if Randall opts in, you might get one, the other one's probably gone, and you're going to be dealing with like some gnarly constraints. If he leaves, then you probably can keep both. I just rather keep both Alexander Walker and Reed if I can.
And just as to paint a picture, so
Yeah.
they enter, let's assume, with Julius Randle's $30.9 million player option and with Naz Reid's $15 million player option, they have $12.8 million under the second apron, and they're basically like right at the first apron. That's again assuming that those are like that Naz Reid and Julius Randle would opt in, which I think a lot of people expect Naz Reid to opt out,
Right.
which maybe he does. But what I would caution with the Naz Reid situation is I think he makes sense on a bunch of teams, but I feel like we go through this a lot of the times with big men, and maybe it only takes one is always kind of the saying. He's close to the non-taxpayer mid-level next year at 15, and it's going up to 14.1. I don't necessarily know that there are going to be teams like those types of players. To me, it always feels like they're more likely, if their team has their bird rights, they're going to get paid by their own team.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just look at him as like the other side of that coin is he's not a $15 million player. You know, like he just objectively is a better player than that. And if his representation is canvassing the league, it wouldn't be crazy to me if somebody out there was like, if you hit free agency, we're going to find a way to give you 20 or 25 a year. And
he gets like the Hartenstein deal where it's the 2 plus the team option on 3, maybe.
Yeah. So that's part of it. The other side of it is, like you said, and this is the more direct parallel to Van Vliet, is like, well, if Randall opts in, then you've got a $30.9 million chunk of salary that's expiring to move. The counter to that is if he opts in, it's a pretty good indication that he's not desired at that number around the league. So like, how tradable is he really? And are you able to net like positive value in a deal where he's the main outgoing salary without throwing in, not that the Wolves are, exactly like flush with picks, but like without having to throw in stuff you'd prefer not to. So it's a real tricky thing. So I would say I want him to opt out, because then I just get to have more control over keeping the two other guys I care more about. Would you rather he opt out or opt in, and so you could trade him?
I'm just trying. So when I'm looking at who they might get, it's almost like, I think I'd rather him opt out, because let's say you go after Kevin Durant. Do you think that Phoenix, knowing that you don't have a ton of draft equity to include, it'll be like somewhat. First of all, let me ask you this question: would you do? So I'm going to assume that you have to include whoever you draft with that Pistons first round pick. Would you include that Pistons first round pick, Rob Dillingham, and then either Naz Reid or Jaden McDaniels in a Kevin Durant trade if you're Minnesota? There'd have to be more salary, and that's where Julius Randle perhaps comes in handy. But is that something you're doing?
So what am I left with in that hypothetical? I still have Conley, DiVincenzo, Edwards.
Well, do you have Conley? He's a free agent. I guess you could re-sign him though. Yeah,
doesn't he have one more year at 10 million, or is he expiring? Did I look at the wrong thing?
Oh, maybe I looked at the wrong thing.
Well,
you are correct. He has another year left. I apologize.
Okay, so I mean, and then what does it mean if you have Conley, and what is it, age 39 season or whatever? I don't know. I'm just trying to think like who's still around. And so I've got to lose probably either McDaniels or Reed for Durant. So basically your cores: Gobert, Edwards, Durant, DiVincenzo, maybe Nas still there. Terrence Shannon's been really good lately. I think I probably do it. Because it's just the kind of, you're trading, you're just getting the floor, just the biggest name, the biggest star there. And maybe that's what Minnesota needs more than like a bunch of guys that don't fit great together. It's not an easy call, but I think I probably do it.
I think in a vacuum, you want Randall then to opt in to keep I think it just makes it easier. You might need to rope in a third team to where someone else is taking on money, depending on what Phoenix financial situation is looking like after this deal. But if you're going after someone who's making as much as Durant, and I think even if you're not, I guess you probably I default to you want Randall to opt in to have that expiring chip, but when you don't have a ton of stuff to attach in pick equity, the value going out becomes the players. And so if you're Minnesota, it's let's say you need to trade. I don't know what the salary player is, but if you're trading McDaniels or Nas Reed as just the primary anchor in a deal, what is still having Julius Randle actually do for you? Like Julius Randle plus that Pistons pick get you who? So if you're really trying to go in on a star who's looking on his way out and you know that you're going to get them, I'll say at a discounted rate relative to what they're worth on the court because they're older or they want to come to you and play with Ant, whatever, you probably want Julius Randle to opt in. But if you're targeting just rotational upgrades that are making less than Julius Randle, or like, I don't know that you want, as Minnesota, I don't know that. And Julius Randle, by the way, has not been terrible this year. I just don't think that he's a fit for this roster moving forward. I guess you could say you want to roll over the salary slot, but then you need to believe that, again, that what you have, basically, I would say that Piston, because if you attach Rob Dillingham to Julius Randle, you better hope you're like really like that's the Kevin Durant type of scenario, but you better hope you're getting someone really good because Dillingham's supposed to be a huge part of your long term. And so that's where I'm talking myself in a circle, but that's where I'm struggling with the Julius Randle element of it all.
It's really hard. I think it's not clear that I think at the bottom of it, it's not clear that he at $30.9 million in expiring salary is actually like a positive asset. Like as far, I guess if it keeps you from having to give up more guys in a 2 or 3 for 1 kind of trade, then maybe that's valuable. But I think the stuff you have to add into the deal because it's Randall and he's not super desirable, because look, the fit issues are going to follow him wherever he goes. Like he's kind of defined by fit issues. Like that's just what his game has been. So maybe that means you're having to give up more young pieces that you don't want to because he's the main. It's a thorny thing. I really don't know. That's why I'm almost like, if he just opts out, I don't have to worry about it. If I'm the Wolves, I don't have to think about it anymore.
Well, do you consider doing, and this would matter more for midseason purposes, but like bring him back at 3 years for $60 million?
I don't think so. I've just been low on Randall as like a clean fit on a good team for a long time. I think maybe that's too simple, but that's where I'd be on it.
I do think that regardless of what kind of happens with Randall, I would expect them to do something semi-significant if they get bounced in the first round or the play-in.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact that where they're going to be entering the playoffs this year versus last year, like suggests that changes are coming.
Our next team on the docket is the Philadelphia 76ers. Underwent some changes last year, but woof. I mean, it's interesting because there's a chance that they just don't do it. Maybe they keep their own pick and then they just roll forward with that. But I would think, just given the timeline, if you assume Embiid's going to be healthy next year and you're not going to move him, you're almost obligated to continue exploring what can you get for these like the first round picks that you have. But do you see a scenario in which they go the other way? Let's say they do keep their own pick, which I think, so I was breaking down the numbers on just like, what are the odds that they're keeping their pick? And it looks like they'll fall they could maybe get to the 5th worst record, in which case they would have a 64% chance, I believe, of keeping their pick. If they stay where they are, it's like a 40% chance or
46, 44, I think. Yeah.
46. But then if because they're involved with the Nets and the Bulls as well, like you could also just see them drop to 34.5% chance of keeping their pick, or even lower than that. But I didn't mean to get us hung up on those details. If they do keep their own pick, do you see any scenario in which it's, well, can we get anything for Embiid, get anything for Paul George, and we'll take the long view with Jared McCain, this pick, and Tyrese Maxey?
It doesn't feel like a Daryl Morey approach, right. Because history suggests that he will try to turn. It won't just go Maxey and young guys and picks. Like I feel like he'll be on the hunt for like, well, who's someone out there, the championship equity thing, like who's someone out there we could turn Embiid and the pick into that gives us a real, decent crack at it. Like, and also like, even if I just like, where can they send Embiid that's going to bring, like, what do you get for Joel Embiid? That like, I have no idea like what the pick and player packages coming back for him would be right now. And like, there obviously stuff has to change. I think because I'm so hung up on like, I just don't think there's any way to gauge what Embiid is worth. And I don't think there's a haul out there for him. Like that's the only thing I am fairly certain of at the moment is you're not getting the 4 unprotected firsts and whatever coming back. It's just going to have to be remaking the supporting cast again. Like Yabusele is a free agent. Oubre and Drummond and Gordon, aren't all super important, but they have player options. I don't think you can trade Paul George for value. So I think this team will look different, but it will be the supporting cast again. I just think that seems like the most likely set of changes to me. Do you agree? Because I just don't, or do you see like, how do you flip Embiid and or George for like anything? I just don't know what's out there.
I would be I think someone would give you let's set this over under on 1.5 first round picks you get for Joel Embiid over the offseason if you moved him.
I think it's
now let's throw this number out there. He is owed $248.1 million over the next 4 years with 0 injury protections.
That's why that's why I think I lean first of all, like they can't trade him at all. So I guess I have to go under, but just because like, who's taking that on now? If you said a year from now, and like maybe at this point in 2026, Embiid has played 60 games already or whatever. I mean, that's a lot. If they say he's played 50 games and looks not an MVP, but is, fringy all NBA. Okay, maybe. But like right now, with all the uncertainty, like we don't even know what kind of surgery he's going to have. Like what team out there over the summer with no real visibility into how he's recovering is going to give up anything for him with all that money on the deal.
I just feel like there's always a team. I'm just going to go over.
You're taking the field. I'm saying impossible. So I like your odds, but still.
I just 1.5 first round picks is kind of such a low bar to clear, especially if one of them isn't great or the equivalent. So I'll go over, but that is, I mean, there's a chance because of the player he could still be. I think you'd still put, like Bradley Beal having no trade clause is worse. That just might be one of the worst contracts in the NBA. What I do think is not more fascinating, but also fascinating is if you were to move Paul George, 3 years left on his max deal, are you getting first round equity for Paul? And it's not, look, Paul George not had his best year, but like I think Paul George can still be a useful player and is more scalable than a lot of others. Well, at least in theory, than a lot of other stars. He's willing to take podcast hiatus to contribute to championship pushes. I think that might pique the attention of some contenders. No,
at least he has his priorities right. I don't know. Like, don't you feel like Paul George is like dangerously close to being someone that like you're paying to get off of? I mean, it's like, given his age, given it's some injuries every year, declining production, like I don't, and I think the other aspect of this is all the second apron stuff and all the new CBA stuff, and in conjunction with like looking at how stuck Phoenix is. Granted, Beal's no trade clause is a huge part of that, and the looming specter in Boston of like, when do we break this up because of cost? Like, I think a contract like George's, even if he's like a solid starter, teams are like, I don't want that. Like, we can't build a real team anymore if we have a guy making the max that either isn't healthy or isn't like a clear superstar.
So if you were, let's just say you were Brooklyn, if the Sixers just offered to put Paul George into your cap space, you wouldn't do it.
Well, that's different than like getting positive stuff back. Like if I'm Brooklyn, I do that because I want the picks attached to him.
You have to include. You were saying he's dangerously close to having to include things to get off. So I'm asking, what is
I see. Well, Brooklyn's a pretty good exception to that. I think in general, the point I'm trying to make poorly is that I think like all things being equal, George is not necessary. George is close to being someone that I don't think you get positive value for in a trade. But if you're dumping him somewhere and attaching picks and that team doesn't care about like what a ridiculous disconnect there is between his salary and his production, then that's different. But like if you're Brooklyn, the only reason you want Paul George is because you might get picks attached to him, right? Like that's a different kind of acquisition.
I still think that maybe have I entered my era of just like, oh, these are the players that I kind of grew up on. And so I just assume they're still going to be good, where I'm like, I give up a first round pick for George, or is it even like, I'm not saying I give up a first round pick here, but if you were Detroit and there's like Tobias Harris, and like you're just feeling like you're not giving up. Like, what would you do Tobias Harris and Ron Holland for Paul George if you're Detroit and he wants to be in Detroit, let's say?
Yeah, I think you probably have to do that. But like Harris is a bad contract, so
He's expiring. It'd be funny to see him back in Philly, though.
That's true. Yeah. No, I think maybe I've gone too harsh on it, but I in trying to think about how the Sixers might remake themselves, I struggle. So like, if you're the Sixers, do you have any interest in getting Tobias Harris and Ron Holland for Paul George? Like, is that
only if you're looking to get, if you think his contract, well, let's say you could win the draft lottery, have Cooper Flag, and to say, okay, like this is all of a sudden a wholesale reset. I
yeah.
do think failing that, what you said at the top of the Sixers part is, I mean, you also have to consider that we're not just talking about this OKC pick commitment. So like that could spill into, if they keep their pick, that then just spills into next year and is loosely protected. They also owe that pick to Brooklyn in 2027. So they're almost obligated to continue going for it. I don't think you can map out a path where you're still trying to be competitive and you're trading Joel Embiid. That's for sure. Because
Right.
I guess it comes down to if you think he's never going to play again, but I haven't seen something that bleak out there. You're not going to get rid of Maxey in that case. And so then it comes down to, could you attach things? Like, could you attach stuff to Paul George and enter the Kevin Durant sweepstakes? Does that do anything for you? I don't think you would have enough. Is Paul George, like, I'm trying to think of what would be the next disgruntled player. Like if Phoenix made Devin Booker available and they're for some reason keeping Kevin Durant, like Paul George and the picks you have aren't going to get you Devin Booker probably. So I don't even know how you upgrade. My point would be, how do you put yourself in a better situation by trading Paul George?
I don't know. I that's the thing. It's like Embiid, where you are just sort of stuck and you got to see if this thing works next year, and you build around the margins. You just, continue rebuilding the supporting cast year over year.
One thing I kind of thought of, I don't think Sacramento would necessarily be involved in this, but like, would you rather have, as the Sixers, would you still rather have Paul George over Zach LaVine?
Oh man. If I'm the Kings, I would definitely rather have George than LaVine. So I guess that's putting the lie to my
balling in Sacramento for the most part. I don't know.
Yeah, well, they got enough guys that can score and not make good decisions. I think I think if I'm the Sixers, I don't love Maxey, McCain, Levine as my defensive like 1-2 combos. I don't know. That's a tough one.
I have another one too. I'm just throwing out these Paul George or Brandon Ingram. Substantially younger than Paul George.
And cheaper, I guess.
And to that end, if you were Toronto, which you could, like, if the Sixers were just like, we will give you Paul George and the Clippers pick for Brandon Ingram or something, you pounce on that, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think you would, because that.
And at that point, I think even if Brandon Ingram's an upgrade, you're the Sixers. You're saying no. Like, what are we kind of doing here? That's the spot they're in. I think you phrased it this way, right? You think it's going to happen with the supporting cast, where maybe they end up getting someone who's a part of their closing lineup, but it's going to be replacing like not any member of the big three. It's going to be like kind of filling that out.
Kelly Oubre gets, replaced by somebody that's in that range, maybe.
I would be curious though, how good of a player they could get with the assets they have independent of the big three, because they have picks. If they keep this year's pick, we haven't even thought about that. If you keep this year's pick and you have a top 6 selection, you attach that to some of the other money on your books. You have other picks. You have Jarrett McCain now. Getting to salary and then working within the aprons could maybe get difficult, but that's like a real. I don't know that you're winning any sweepstakes, especially with the salary matching limitations. But you could, in theory, do something splashy there.
That's that is an interesting point though. Like, they're extremely top heavy salary wise, and so the fourth. So you take out, so next year 55 for Embiid, 52 for Paul George, 38 for Maxey. The next biggest salary that is guaranteed to be on the books, barring a trade, is McCain at $4.2 million. Like, that's just like the gap between. So their mid-tier salaries just like don't exist. They don't have anybody.
You almost have to pick up, unless you're really worried about apron space. But I think as of now, they're projected to be 18.6 million beneath the first apron. Like, correct. You almost have to, Kelly Oubre Jr. staying on this team because or is his a player option? Oh
It
yeah,
is,
it is.
yeah.
Maybe he'll leave. So
He
no, you
could
can't.
decline it though, and they got something worked out where it's like three for 45 or so, something like that.
So they might even be in a situation where if they're going to do anything, we looked at it. They were overturning their roster a lot this offseason. It'll happen in the middle of the season when these contracts they either just signed or renegotiated after a player opt out are then eligible to be traded.
Yeah, yeah. They're in a weird spot. I mean, for every possible reason.
The next team, the Phoenix Suns, Grant. The Shams just saying that Kevin Durant and the Suns are going to work together finding him a trade kind of guarantees that they're going to look a lot different next year.
Yeah, fair enough. They might have a new coach. That might be another thing. Although if Durant's gone, Booker's still there.
Colin Giuseppe made it very clear that he's trying to save Mike Budenholzer's job.
He's
Colin
in his corner.
Sorry.
Yeah. So like I don't know. Do you want to do the where does Durant make sense right now? I mean,
I did it with Mort, and we talked about it a little bit with the Rockets. Is there any team that stands out as they should be in on? Actually, can I ask you this? I did talk about it with Mort, but forget the other moving parts involved. But if it's a 1-for-1 Jimmy Butler for Kevin Durant swap sort of setup, are you doing that as the Warriors?
Man, I think Durant is still a better player, but whatever is happening because Jimmy Butler is there is like kind of real, and he hasn't even been that good, honestly. Like I've caught myself thinking he looks hurt, or he's just like not aggressive, won't look at the basket, but he's still just
settling for jumpers. But like you've seen some of like the getting out and transit like off the ball and like getting to the basket there, but then it does feel like he's settling at points. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is to say, like maybe he's going to be even better. Although like when you're 35, that's always like a risky thing to assume.
They are, Grant, they're like a plus 25 per 100 when he plays without Steph, though.
There's like weird magic. There's like fairy dust. I don't know what it is. Like he just showed up and sprinkled it on everybody, and somehow him being there means everybody else plays better. Like I don't know. Maybe that's just the mark of a really great player. I would still maybe lean towards Durant.
Post's aura is infectious, and that's why the Warriors are.
You know what we're not accounting for is maybe this is all because of Quentin Post, and Jimmy Butler's got nothing to do with it. Yeah, I don't know that. I would need some therapy, I think, to really give you a concrete answer on Durant. I think I would lean like, yeah, I like Durant better, but then I would immediately regret it.
The most compelling argument, I think, for it is you believe that Jonathan Kuminga replaces enough of the foul drawing rim pressure stuff from Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
That's where then his fit with Kevin Durant is just way more intuitive. But I would still need to, I lean to no, but I think if Jonathan Kuminga comes back and shows you that he can play an offense as part of this larger ecosystem, but more importantly, that he's going to be a real defensive body. Yeah. That's when I would look at it and okay, all right, Jonathan Kuminga is not Jimmy Butler, but can he approximate, let's just say even 70 to 80% of Jimmy Butler? If you believe he could do that, then I think that would be the compelling argument for me. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna give you 0% of like the Butler intangibles. But I'm just glad to hear you say that Jonathan Kuminga is the most important player on the Warriors. I'm glad you finally came around. What besides KD? So like Miami is another KD one that's just like, okay, sure, it could be that.
Isn't the real question? You're the Suns. Let's say Houston's off the table and you can't get your own picks back. What are you then targeting in a Kevin Durant trade? And based on the report, I mean, here are a couple things. Does moving Kevin Durant make it more likely that Bradley Beal will open the scope of his no trade clause?
I don't. I think the only thing that makes him likelier to waive the no trade clause is just it not being the middle of the season. I don't think so. So you know what I mean? Like, maybe it won't upend his life as much if he can do this in the off season, like versus in February, which he was like, I'm out. I don't think what happens with Durant changes a lot for Beal. I guess unless you're going to say like, well, if Durant's gone, then the Suns aren't going to win, so he's going to want to leave. Well, the Suns aren't winning now, and they were trying desperately to trade him, and he didn't want to leave. So I don't think that has a huge amount of sway.
And honestly, if he was going to be more likely to waive his no trade clause, you'd probably prefer to, can we still figure out something to move him and keep Durant? Yeah. The bigger question is all the reporting, PHNX Sports' Gerald Bourguet, I believe, so that everything he has heard is that Devin Booker doesn't want to leave. The Suns will never trade him unless he asks for out. If you're Devin Booker and Kevin Durant gets traded, in theory, aren't you more likely to then consider asking for out unless you look at the return and say, I believe we're headed in the right direction? And then the question then becomes, what does a better job of selling Devin Booker on your future? Prioritizing picks, especially if they're not your own? Or is it, no, we need to get like real fucking talent in here to
Yeah.
where you're thinking, let's use Minnesota as an example. Like, could Phoenix be intrigued by, well, let's try and get Gobert? Like, would you do Gobert and Jaden McDaniels and then figure out how to make the money work from there for Kevin Durant if you're Minnesota?
I think if you're, yeah, I was thinking more of from Phoenix's perspective. Like, it does feel like that's the type of offer. So, like, I don't know why they came into my head, but it's like, oh, Atlanta. That not that Durant wants to go there, but it's like I'm trying to think of teams that might be able to give you back like 2.5 interesting starters, maybe one of whom is like young, and then a pick. So it's like Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels and whatever for Durant. Like, I don't know if Atlanta does that. One, probably not. But like that kind of package, it's like the 4 first rounders thing. Like if you're Phoenix, I guess, okay, that's good, but like you're still taking back salary unless you're just dumping him, I don't know where, some Brooklyn, which that'd be fun. So yeah, like it's gotta be a couple starters, and then maybe that's what Booker's not gonna care if you get first round picks at the back half of this decade. Like he's gonna, if you want him to stay, I think you do need to just get a couple guys in there that he can look at the roster and be like, there's a case to be made that now we have a chance to just be better. Like that should be the only thing that matters to him, right?
Right. And I think you also, Kevin Durant is your only chance at really doing that because Bradley Beal, as we mentioned, the no trade clause just doesn't have a ton of value. And because Phoenix, at least as of, I guess next year, are they projected to be, where are they apron wise? I'm seeing that they're, this can't, like, you're still going to be tethered to like these financial constraints. And so you're not going to be able to, okay, we got picks, but now let's go consolidate and get more talent in here. And so Kevin Durant's like your best chance to break, I guess, it up and say, okay, we got 2 players who maybe they're non-stars, but they're going to deepen the rotation, maybe make us a more balanced team. And we view ourselves as being immediately competitive. And I just don't know. You say, could we get 2 starters from somebody? I just don't know what team is giving you 2. Like Atlanta would be interesting, but does Kevin Durant want to go there? And they feel like they're kind of headed in the opposite direction of that.
Yeah. No, it seems like Miami, Golden, it's just like Minnesota. Maybe I have a hard time getting beyond teams that we've actually heard, like at least whispered to have been like landing spots for him, just because of all the reasons you mentioned.
Do you think that he would be a candidate to go the basketball sicko route? And if it was just like Orlando really wanted him, and he's kind of looking, he's like, oh, they got Paolo and Franz there. Now we got these 3 guys that are just 6'10". And could you see him thinking like, yeah, I feel like he's the type of player that would think.
I thought you were going to say Oklahoma City would just go back and just win a title that he couldn't win before. Yeah, I mean, newsflash, Durant, it's hard to figure out what Durant wants in a team. So, I mean, I don't know about Orlando. Yeah, like I guess you could see him just kind of looking at the landscape and insofar as he's got control over this and saying like where seems like the most fun place to play. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good, I don't think anybody has a good gauge on like what he's necessarily after at this point.
Do you think he's in Phoenix at the start of next season?
No way.
Do you think Devin Booker's in Phoenix at the start of next season?
Yes, but then Booker is immediately just a number 1 on the like where's he going to go trade discussion rankings.
The next team on our board, the Portland Trailblazers, which is kind of the team that I think would fall under, okay, they're going to look at moving Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton's an expiring contract, Anthony Simons is an expiring contract. But have they also sort of been good enough for long enough? They have the 5th best defense in the league since January 1st. And they're comfortably over 500 during that span. I don't know how much value we assign to that. I think it's a big deal that, okay, while when they've been healthy, you could say the minutes of, we've still seen too much Jeremy Grant, too much Ayton.
Yeah.
But everybody else that's driving this for the most part is part of the long-term program. They're going to have a lottery pick this year and all that, although they are close to the play-in, but they're not going to come out of the play-in if they're, even if they make it. But could you see them just we saw it a little bit with the Denny Avdia trade where it was like we'll include like future picks to get someone that we think fits like aligned with where we're going and makes us immediately better. And if they continue to finish the season on this heater, and knowing you look at Shaden Sharp feels almost, I guess Scoot's their biggest mystery box technically, but Shaden Sharp between him, Donovan Clingan, Tamati Kamara, Denny Avdia, it's like, well, do we just have our base right here? And then if we want to go out, we have other salaries, we have picks, we want to go out and maybe get somebody to make us. Remember, we were trying to spot, well, who's that next team up? I think it's a leap a few bridges too far to say it's the Blazers, but could they think in terms of the mindset, especially because it feels like they've been caught in this rebuild for longer than they actually have because of how the Damian Lillard era was, mediocre towards the end.
Yeah, I really like the Blazers. Like, I really think I have less hesitation about saying, or I just like, I feel really good about their core because those 5 young guys you mentioned, just like, I like that could just be your start. Scoot, Sharp, Kamara, Avdia, Clingan. Like, feel pretty good about that.
Could be insane.
I feel pretty good about that. Like, everybody's kind of got their niche. Like, you have a lot of the boxes checked that you'd want in like a functional, like well put together, like starting/closing unit. It's not perfect, but like everybody is good and promising and like should get better. I don't know. Maybe Avdia is already kind of topped out, but even he's had stretches where he's looked better this year. So the thing I look at most with Portland and trying to gauge like what their options are and how they can improve is so they're just between Ayton Simons and Robert Williams III. Those are all going to be on expiring deals in 25-26. And the thing that I'm kind of stuck on is it a mistake that they have they held on to all 3 of these guys through the deadline and can go into next year with them as expirings? Because like, as trade chips, are they less valuable because they'll be, half season rentals if they trade them next year? Are they somehow more valuable to be traded this off? Like, are they timing this right? Because if you're of the opinion that like, you could just say, we got to get these guys like out of the way. I'm excluding Grant because he's on the books for so many more years and dollars. But like between Simons, Ayton, and Robert Williams III, like, did they err in not moving them sooner? And have they kind of put themselves in a position where now it's like, you can't really expect to get anything to bolster the young core you have by moving them? It's more just like, we're dumping these guys onto a team that wants them for 3 months and then has to deal with their free agency.
So I actually don't think upon more reflection, Jeremy Grant's the move that I thought, just like, not even just get the contract off the books, but just like, you have a lot of players that can fill like the minutes that he's going to play.
Yeah.
Simons was the standalone asset to me that if you wanted to move him and get picks back, you probably missed the window to top that out. However, he's young enough and so important enough to your spacing that I kind of don't mind. And with Ayton, I think he's more valuable as an expiring contract. I just don't think there was a ton of value around the league for him as a, like I don't think anyone who's trading for him is doing so other than because he either helps make the math work or they're sending out a longer term deal that they don't want anymore. Okay. So expiring is better. And with Robert Williams III, I think it's kind of a wash. If you weren't gonna, if the offers for him were like 2 or 3 seconds this year, I think you probably get 2 or 3 seconds for him over the offseason or next season, unless he's even more hurt. And then even if he is, you miss the boat on seconds. I like Ayton. That's where I was almost coming at this from isn't there a possibility that they look at, let's say, the Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton salary slots as well? What can we attach to X to maybe make our team better? Like, I don't think that's a path that people have considered with the Blazers. I also I do want to ask you, because this has been, and it does, I think it kind of informs this entire discussion with, will they look a lot different next year? Do you think they're making an error by not tanking? Because I struggle with that question, I've seen it floated a lot. What would tanking look like for this team when you have, if you started to rank their most impactful players this season, I think a bunch of those guys you would want on the roster moving forward. Exactly. And so what does if tanking looks like, well, we got to shut down Scoot and Tamani Kamara, that's like, all right.
That's the problem. The reverse of it is how I was going to like kind of try to explain it, is like, the guys that you would play more in order to tank are good. And so and young. And so like you're not like you could play Scoot and Sharp and Klingon and all the five guys we mentioned. You can play those guys more. The problem is like Klingon really helps the defense. Like he's a positive force, and like Scoot has played great. And maybe that changes if you're spending a bunch more time against first units with
Mhm.
some of these guys. But like I really don't. I don't think they're equipped to tank. Like you could, unless you go full bore and you're just like, hey, everybody's hurt and we're going to play just two-way guys and whatever. So I think like normally we would be just like, what are you guys doing? You're stuck in the middle. This feels different. This isn't a Chicago Bulls or Sacramento Kings middle. It's like they're in the middle, but that's because their young players have been good enough to drive them up to that point from the bottom. And the momentum is, continuing upward. So like, I don't think it's a mistake to not tank. I think you could also say like they kind of have three guys at least that are the cornerstone types you would tank for, or like at least, promising enough. So yeah, if they'd started out 1-20, then yeah, no matter what else happens, you should have tanked. But they're too good. Their young players are too good. And that's a great problem, right? That's what you want.
I think you look at it and say, unless they don't believe, and I still think Scoot is the most likely, but that none of their young guys can be their tent pole of the future,
Mhm.
then that's when it becomes a mistake. If you just believe that, no, it can't be Scoot, and maybe it can't be, but as of right now, the way he's played this season, no, the door's open, that it
Right.
absolutely could be him. I think he's their best shot at it. And so because you have him, it's not, you use the Bulls, it's not that situation where they still don't have that directional building block. And so that's why I'm ultimately okay with where they are. And then also, repeating myself here, it's what I just don't know what tanking would look like
Yeah.
for this
How
division.
do you do it?
Like if you start playing Duop Reef, you're probably just going to win more games.
We know that. That's given.
Do you think they'll look? I think they will move Aiton, Simons, or like at least one of those guys, or Grant this offseason. And I would just be curious if it's Simons, or even if it's Aiton, just because he's expiring. I can view it through the lens of, oh, maybe they're taking back a bad contract and that's how they're getting picks or prospects. If it's Grant, I'm almost assuming that they're kind of doing the Denny Avdia thing where it's
Mhm.
we're attaching stuff and we're trying to make ourselves better.
Yeah, I think so. I think of those four, we'll throw Grant in there with Simons and Aiton, and why can't I ever remember? And
Robert
Williams.
Williams.
I can never remember the third guy. I'd say like at least two of them will be gone. I think over the summer would be my guess.
I'll take over 1.5. I like
Okay.
that line. The Orlando Magic, it feels counterintuitive to throw them here because they're not a team that has prided themselves on making big changes, but they're also a team that even amid all the injuries, bummer about the Jalen Suggs news, you look at them and it's all right. We know what they
Yeah.
need on offense 10 times over. This is the offseason. They have to do something to address it, right?
I'm trying to think of, because they feel like they've been this team for a long time where it's just like we all see it. What could we please do something? I'm trying to think of, can you think of another team that with like a positional or like a certain statistical deficiency just
Oh,
let it ride for this long? Who comes to mind?
Memphis in the post Rudy Gay wing era.
Oh wow, you're bringing it back. Yeah, that's true. They have not had Zaire Williams. Dan, how dare you?
Look, I was in the bag for Zaire Williams, so I can't even
We
try.
all were. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm trying. I mean, like, I feel like we talked a lot about the Pelican center the last offseason, but like,
But like
I don't know.
they've had Steven Adams and Jonas Found, like those were real
Right.
centers.
Them not having a stretch center maybe is a comparable thing. Yeah. So Orlando clearly needs just shooting, someone to push the pace, a guard that runs the out, like all that kind of thing. Do When you look at the roster as they have it now, do you just constantly find yourself looking to like, I would like to peel off like one or two defensive minded big guys and turn them into a shooter or like a pace pushing guard? Like, and so you got John Isaac that is like, just, I know his contract is completely bizarre. 3 non-guaranteed years after next year. So 15 million next year. And then the next 3 after that are like, so yeah, sure. We could spare Jonathan Isaac if we're the Magic, right? I assume Wendell Carter has 10, 18, and 19 million the next 3 years. Like, yeah, I guess you can move him, but like, they just don't do it. They don't make that move. So we're kind of in the wishful thinking section, I think, right now.
Right. And what also is complicated is that organizationally and including with Jamal Mosley, it doesn't even seem like, so let's say you get a player, and granted, they don't necessarily have this player right now, But if you get a player who's good enough or that we deem is good enough, and let's use Anthony Simons as an example, not necessarily, he's not a floor general, but because you have Franz and Paulo, like, I don't even know if they need to skew that way entirely. But are you going to play him enough because he's a deficiency on defense? And it seems like this team is glommed onto the idea that who's ever on the floor needs to be a plus defender. And if all you had were negative defenders on the team, I might agree with you, but all you have are those defensive dudes. And are they going to be too specific and say that player who we acquire, like they need to be good on defense too, which is then restricting their pool even further? Because wouldn't you think, because I'm using these two players as an example because I don't think it would cost. Yeah, it'd be cool to see LaMelo Ball on this team, but like they don't seem, the Magic are not a squad that even if LaMelo Ball was available, even if he said, I want to play in Orlando, I don't feel like that they would include like go all in to that extent. But like, don't you think like a Simons or a Kobe White would make a world of difference for this team? And then I find myself saying, do I trust that they're going to be given the, like, or as soon as they just get blown by or they get screened off, that they're going to be benched and like they're going to be marginalized a little bit? Maybe they just haven't had the player, or like using Jet Howard as the analog just isn't fair because it's Jet Howard. So
Yeah.
but I do wonder if they're too caught up on the idea that they need to have all these rangy or just plus defenders on the court at all times, to where even kind of when they were at their most injured, it's like, well, we would rather see like Tristan DeSilver ball handling reps than really try and like lean into any sort of like real offensive utility here. And that's what I guess worries me or confuses me.
I think the philosophical discussion Orlando needs to have about, can we onboard someone who is not a plus defender, would have to happen like at, preceding the acquisition of that player, as opposed to after you've gotten him and then realizing, oh, he's not a plus defender, so we'll bench him. It's like, if you bring in Anthony Simons, if the Magic do that, they have to already be conceding like, okay, we're going to bend a little bit and not require that he be a shutdown defender. Because like, if you go get Anthony Simons and then you don't play him because he's not a shutdown defender, it's like,
good point,
fellas, you knew like this was all well understood. Like that's just, or Malik Monk or whoever you want it to be, LaMelo. It's like, no, we all understand who they are. You don't get to trade for them and then like stick to your guns culturally and say you can't play because you don't defend. It's like, no, if you go get the guy, you sort of have to let him do him and then have trust in the culture and the priorities that you've built. Like that the other four guys are going to be good defenders. So we're good. Like you can, like, think how many teams can say they always, really good teams always have 5 good defenders on the floor. Like the 24-25 Celtics, or I mean like 23-24 Celtics was one that comes to mind, but like even the great Nuggets teams that won a title, like Jamal Murray's not a good defender. So you had one, Jokic like figured out how to defend, but it's like
Jamal Murray can hit a level defensively where Orlando, I could see trading for him and saying,
and he's
like,
big too. Like he's got good size. That's another thing. But like, you know what I mean? Like generally speaking, you're going to put somebody in your closing lineup that's not like Drew Holiday. Like you're prime Drew Holiday. Like somebody's going to be
Anthony, but even he was buried at the start of the season too.
So maybe really what we're drilling down on is like Orlando just has to start making concessions and say, if we want to win, we're going to need to score. And to do that, we need to like relax our requirements on how good a defender you are to play for us.
Do you think that this is the offseason they'll actually get there?
It fucking better be. Like it doesn't have to be. Like how much longer do you get to keep the same strengths and weaknesses and not change it before we all just look at each, like, what are you doing?
4:06 p.m. Eastern time, March 5th, 2025. Grant gave an impassioned F-bomb about the Orlando Magic. I think that's the closest we've seen him to getting irate on this podcast.
You agree, right? Like they have, it has to happen.
If it doesn't, don't they have built-in cover to say, well, we can't look at all these injuries? Like Jalen Suggs, Paolo Banchero, and Franz Wagner have played 97 minutes together this season. They can, in theory, look to that and say, well, we'll get there. Like we just haven't seen enough of them together.
Here's the other thing is sometimes like, I forget who I was talking about this. So it's like Mark Jackson got the Warriors to defend really well and was just inflexible and not creative and kind of backward in a lot of his other, coaching tendencies. Like, so if Orlando goes and gets an offensive player or two and like stylistically they don't change, then it's kind of on Mosley. Cause then it becomes like this coach coaches one way and we might need someone different to get us to the next, to be our like Steve Kerr that looks at the roster and says like, well, here's how it should go, and like everything clicks. I think like we may not be that far. We all agree Jamal Mosley's like a hell of a defensive coach and like has got Orlando to play in a way that most teams don't, from like an effort standpoint and like that whole thing. That's hard to do. But if he gets offensive players and they don't pick up the pace and shoot and make more threes, then like, I don't know, that's the next conversation we might have to have.
I'm going to will it into existence by saying this is the summer they do it. If it's not a floor general type, it is someone who can handle the ball, make shots from the perimeter, that'll be in their closing lineup. That this is the summer that Orlando's going to go get that player.
Fervently hope so.
Now we get to talk about the Sacramento Kings, who I'm not even sure. They definitely belong on the consideration list, right? I just don't necessarily know where they're headed. They've been good since the trade deadline, small sample size. Now Sabonis is out with that hamstring strain. He'll probably be back in like a minute because it's Sabonis. But just sort of the makeup of this roster of Keegan Murray, Sabonis, DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Malik Monk, Keon Ellis. This is not a team I don't think they're going to consider rebuilding, but do they have now, after the De'Aaron Fox trade, do they have the assets necessary and some of the salaries to say, okay, we're going to go consolidate and try and balance out our roster? And then what does that even look like? I think, look, there are people clamoring for a floor general for them when they had De'Aaron Fox. And like now it's okay, you have LaVine and DeRozan and Monk, and I don't know, I still believe, as good as they've been offensively, statistically, since the trade deadline, I just don't view them as a playoff-proof offense if they were to get there. And so that's a need, but it's not the only need. And I don't know that they have the tools to address all the needs that they have. And so I'm wondering if I'm discounting the idea that could we see them pivot into something more closely resembling a rebuild this summer, especially if they miss the playoffs, whether it's, but they'll make the play-in, or is it, no, the De'Aaron Fox trade, yes, they kind of lost a lot of leverage there. Yes, he wanted to go to the Spurs, but did that kind of telegraph what they're trying to do?
I don't see a rebuild or anything close to it, just because that's not how the Kings have really like ever operated. Like there have been situations where it was more obvious that like a start over was necessary and they didn't do it. And now I think you can look at it's real easy to put, DeRozan, LaVine, Sabonis, Murray, like up on the marquee, and the ownership and fans are like, that's cool. Those guys are good. Like that, that like they can be a decent team. They can be competitive night to night. I think if you're just talking about ceiling, the problems that have been there for a while persist, which is like they over-index on score first / like score only guys that don't help you win on the margins. And like, I think most smart teams are not going to trade you those guys for the LaVines and the DeRozans of the world and the Sabonises, who just their track records are what they are. Like they're play-in guys, they're first round out guys. They, you know what I mean? Like, so if you're just to circle back, like if you sent Monk to Orlando for Isaac and something, like that would make sense to me from like a let's balance out the roster Kings standpoint, and Orlando really. But that isn't the type of trade that the Kings typically make, where it's like Monk's the flashier name, he scores, he generates highlights, he kind of plays a position of need because they don't have a point guard. We should probably talk about Devin Carter and like how he's going to feature going forward. Mm-hmm. But the kinds of trades the Kings need to make to go from like pretty good to something better than that just don't obviously present themselves. But I do think the reason they're here is like they should try to look different next year. I'm not sure if you have a clear way to explain how that might happen.
I don't have a clear way because it seems like you outlaid both of their needs, and I mentioned the floor general type, and then it would be nice to get like you need a different type of look on the front line. Like preferably that player can man some center behind Sabonis, but most certainly like, okay, can you play them with Keegan Murray and Sabonis and help you defensively there? I don't know. Like, I don't know what the order, like Isaac would be a good call out. So like, let's say you're able to make an Isaac trade. He can't play a ton of minutes, but let's just say that's not a factor. If you're moving Monk, what is then the name you go after to help you with your offense? Because Devin Carter, even if he's healthy, that's never been someone that he's profiled as. Right. And I know he's still sort of working his way back, but it's not like he's been a huge part of the rotation anyway. I know there's like there's expectations, let's say, in Sacramento. So that's going to hurt the learning curve. But I don't know why that would make them any more confident in kind of baptizing him by fire next year. And so it's like, is this team better off if you can use Monk and then you have these assets and it's like you end up somehow with Jonathan Isaac and Kobe White? Like, this team is better off, but is that enough? Or if you kind of said, well, now we're going to pay Kobe White a bunch of money, as DeMar DeRozan, I guess, is in the final year of his contract. And that's the other thing too, is with the exception of Sabonis and Keegan Murray, just because we know how extensions and restricted free agency works, what else is here long-term as a known quantity?
Yeah, like LaVine is, I mean, who knows, but that doesn't seem like someone they're like already talking about, like, how do we keep him? That, and DeRozan's non-guaranteed after next year. So he's like, you can kind of view DeRozan as an I don't know if it's a partial. I can't remember if it's a partial or a full non-guarantee, but like DeRozan and Valanciunas next year technically can both be expiring via non-guarantees the following year. So like maybe that's a package you put together to trade for somebody that you do want to like install as a fixture. But yeah, you're totally right. Like Sabonis, Murray, I guess Carter, like other than that, everybody here feels kind of short-timey. And so that actually just means like any rebuild that might be coming down the pike is like kind of a ways off, because they've got like stopgaps for a couple more years before they can really do anything.
It does seem like they need to be a team that consolidates, or not, it's not even consolidate, but like they need to remake their roster in turn. I'll say it this way. They need another closing lineup member for net, like a different, where it's just like the Monk, Murray, Sabonis, DeRozan, LaVine. Like I think Sabonis will be there. Murray should absolutely. They have no business. I don't even care who it is for at this point. Short of like one of the 3 best players in the NBA. So those 2 are there, but I think everybody else on this roster should be viewed as, if not dispensable, then as like a level of interchangeable.
Do you think the DeRozan acquisition was just like objectively a mistake at this point?
Yes, just because like, what have you done? I made this joke a bunch of times. Like, you're Bulls West now. You have DeRozan shooting well from 3 since the trade deadline. So you have DeRozan, LaVine, a liability defensively as your center, who's also like a good passer and provides some stretch. Sabonis, I think, let me make it clear, is way better than Vucevic. But I just don't. There's no way, and this is why, when I've seen the defenses of the Kings, like, well, like the De'Aaron Fox situation was beyond their control. It wasn't. Like they clearly had no idea really what was coming, or didn't have a good handle on it, because then why would you have done the DeRozan deal only to pivot into the Zach LaVine deal? Like, you could have figured out the machinations of getting LaVine outright last summer. And yes, you did it without giving up a first-round pick. You gave him De'Aaron Fox.
Right.
That's way more than a first-round pick.
I feel like the Kings look around the league and like absorb like what wins, like what really wins, and then they go like, but what if we tried this? And like do not that, where it's just like, let's get guys that have a high points per game and rebound per game averages. Surely that will get us to where we need to be. Like, doesn't it feel like I don't know, they're playing like fantasy basketball? That's such a reductive criticism, but it's like, how do you put this roster together with its, clear weaknesses and strengths and conclude like, yep, this is going to get us? It's just like, I don't understand the vision at all.
So between Monk, DeRozan, and LaVine, do you think all 3 of them are on the Kings next year?
DeRozan, LaVine. I'm going to say no. And I weirdly think Monk will be the one to move because he's like seems the easiest to move of those 3.
I think when you look at, he balances money with standalone on-court value the best.
Yeah, right. That's a good way to put it.
Now, you know what'd be really funny, because you mentioned Monk to Orlando. Wouldn't it be very magic if we're pushing them to run someone who could run the offense and get it to play faster? They get someone to run the offense, but he can't shoot and you won't play faster, and it's DeMar DeRozan. Like, that's that would be more a brand.
Can you think of who would be more in the way of Franz and Paolo than DeRozan? Like, that would just be kryptonite to their team.
We're into the dark horse section, and you chose this one. So take it away, Grant.
Well, so when you get Luka Doncic, it just like fundamentally alters your timeline. You have a new central figure there for the first time since LeBron showed up. And so that, more than anything, and we'll get into why, like, there's not a whole lot that otherwise suggests like big changes are coming. I just think when you reorient your whole team around a different player, it brings into play the possibility of like a lot of differences, a lot of different things happening over the summer and into next year. So like I guess you have to discuss like LeBron and Finney Smith both have player options. I don't know, LeBron, if he opts out, will just sign a new deal. Finney Smith seems pretty integral to what they're doing, so they'll do whatever they can to bring him back. But you also have extension eligibility for several guys, including Luka, but like Hachimura, Reeves, Finney Smith, I said, Kleber, Gabe Vincent. You're about $6 million under the first apron. So like you could consolidate and still have a future first in a deal. Maybe, I don't know if they can trade another first on draft night, but they have assets to make trades. That's just all to outline.
Will they be the first team to trade something related to 2032, like a 2032 swap or the pick? Because they have the 2031. Like they could trade 2031 or 32 on draft night.
You would think, right? Because if you go get Luka, suddenly you're like, okay, in prime.
I just hope they don't do it for an injury, but they're going to give it up for Robert Williams. They tried Mark Williams. Let's go to another injury-prone Williams with Rob Williams.
I mean, can we talk about the bullet dodged on that? Like officially, just like,
especially because they're like first in defense since the last time Anthony Davis played, which predates the deadline. But we're talking, would you have said, I'll say depending on how you feel about Vanderbilt or Finney Smith, they traded two of their three most important defenders in the Luka trade, and their defense is just, they've been frenetic. They've played some tough opponents.
Yeah. No, it's unbelievable. Actually, I do mean unbelievable because the defense, I do not believe the defense will continue to be this good.
We're going to be saying this as they're in the conference finals.
Oh, absolutely.
Like 3-0.
Game 6 of the finals, going to regress. Opponents can't miss threes forever. We'll stick to those forever. No, I mean, do you agree, or am I just like, am I overvaluing the sort of transformative effect on their plans of getting Luka? Because like realistically, you have some mid-tier salaries you could trade, but it's not like we've talked about a half dozen teams with just more screamingly obvious changes ahead. It's just like Luka's here, so stuff's gonna get weird.
I think you're spot on here, and I'd be curious to say they feel like they might fall into the singular transaction bucket more so than they do all of this, but maybe some of their other guys like a Rui or even an Austin Reeves has more standalone value that you're like, so that you can make a series of different moves. But they have, I won't say it's a super high end offer, but I think you can include a first round pick this summer and then like up to 3 swaps. And so with the matching money that they have, and I assume that Dorian Finney-Smith will opt in and they'll extend off that number because they'll want to prioritize the room beneath the first apron. I don't know what's the single best player you could get for that. And I don't mean to play the Lakers exceptionalism card, but they did just get Luka Doncic. I know Anthony Davis is great, but if Kevin Durant, would you I guess if you're the Lakers, if Kevin Durant wanted to go, would you figure out a way to make the math work with consolidation around them? Or are you more looking at this, we need to flesh out like kind of the depth? It's the big man, of course, but like we want another wing type in here, because they probably, with only 1 first round pick to trade, if you want them to pull off 2 moves of consequence, you're either looking at it and saying, okay, well, one team has both, I'll say getting 2 players of consequence. One team has both of these players, or one of our players has like a lot of standalone value, because you could trade a first round pick, but like swaps as standalone value are beyond limited. And so I'll be curious to see I assume it will be like the big man route, but are they going to to what end are they going to go after a big man? Like what type of swing are they going to make? Because look, Robert Williams III, if you don't need to give up a first round pick for him, he's absolutely somebody that they should be looking at this summer.
Yeah, I think we should also assume to bring it back to Lakers exceptionalism, like all things being equal, someone like Clint Capella might be willing to sign for less to be with the Lakers and catch lobs from Luke. You know what I mean? Like the Lakers should, assuming they work it right, so they have like maximum financial flexibility in free agency, that money should go pretty far, because now it's not just Lakers and LeBron, it's Lakers, LeBron, and Luka, and guys like certainly big guys should want to be in on that like ASAP, because you're gonna look real good. And so like I think the Durant thing is interesting, or something like that, for like one more guy. I'm sort of the opinion that Luka is just, well, the best Dallas teams had, him and then Kyrie and then a bunch of guys that defended and caught lobs and shot threes. So I think the Lakers can kind of take a shotgun approach of like, let's get 3 or 4 guys in the DFS mold. Because you also have Reeves, by the way. Like you could turn Rui or Reeves into 2, helpful players. And the level.
You think you could do that with Rui? I'm totally there with Reeves for
Well,
sure.
yeah, maybe not so much Rui.
Also,
Just
Reeves is so
salary
cheap
wise,
that
you'd have to
Reeves is
sweeten
so
it.
cheap you might not be able to turn him
Well,
into.
and I think Reeves, they should just keep Reeves. Like
I'm with you.
I think he's really good, and if LeBron starts to fade, there's your secondary playmaker that can actually just be a point guard too. But yeah, it's kind of hack, but like 3-and-D, lob catching big, that stuff's not super expensive relative to the superstars the Lakers tend to chase, in other scenarios. So like they should just be all over it in free agency, adding a guy here and a guy there, and they should be looking to see if they can get some of their mid-tier salaries and a pick to turn into a closing lineup guy. I think that's totally realistic, and I think they will do that because now that you have Luka, like why aren't you going to do that?
And there's also just not process of elimination. When you look at who's playing the most per game when healthy since the trade deadline, LeBron, Austin Reeves, Rui, Luca, and Dorian Finney-Smith. And then everyone after that, Jackson Hayes, Gabe Vincent, Jordan Goodwin, Dalton Connect, Jared Vanderbilt, Trey Jameson. It just feels like, and I would even extend it upwards. I won't, maybe it's Rui, maybe it ends up being, I wouldn't guess it would be Austin Reeves, but maybe it ends up being Dorian Finney-Smith leaving or something. But certainly Jackson Hayes, of their like top 10 most used players right now, like half of those just could be different
Right.
next year.
It probably should be, I think, just, because like you said, that once you got past, who was it on the list? Probably like Finney Smith. And it's like, and Rui, like, yeah, these guys are all, we could upgrade on every single one of these 6 through 10 spots in the rotation.
My dark horse pick is the Memphis Grizzlies. I don't know that I'm saying Ja Morant will enter the trade rumor mill. I just look at it and say, if once they get to the playoffs, there could be a chance that they get bounced in the first round. If something like that happens, or there's not really a competitive second round start, my assumption would be that they start looking at, is it consolidation that a lot of people have been begging for a while? Do they look at, I think Jaren Jackson, honestly, I think Jaren Jackson Jr. and is the player that's most secure there for the future, even more so than Ja Morant, just when you consider the injury stuff. But if you don't make a deep playoff run, are you going to consolidate? Do you maybe look at moving Ja Morant and thinking that you could get better? Do you maybe look at dangling Desmond Bane to see if that is something that could satisfy, like, let's say, improving the wing situation specifically? Something, they have all their own first round picks. They're going to have cap space, which I assume they'll use to renegotiate Jaren Jackson's Jr. deal. Actually, they probably won't even need to, because he's going to make All NBA. Although,
Hopefully.
yeah, how long is he out for? I didn't see that.
Well, so he's only got to play like 7 more games, I think, to get to 65. And I think it was, I think it's going to be close, actually. So, I would imagine he'll manage to find a way to play those games. So he gets the Supermax, but still.
So if he's not Supermax eligible, I'm assuming that they will use the cap space to renegotiate his deal. But like, they have the flexibility beneath the luxury tax to say, we can consolidate. And they have all their own picks. They have interesting young, like, if you just include Zach Edey, Jalen Wells, sure, but like Gigi Jackson's intriguing. Like, Santi Aldama is going to be a free agent, so we got to factor that into their his cap hold is within their cap space plan, but is he still on the team? This just feels like they're so deep that they need to consolidate, and a lot of that, it's been born from necessity out of injuries. But like, all these names, that like a Vince Williams Jr. and a Scottie Pippen Jr., like, all these guys are just not going to continue to be on the roster moving forward if you fall short of the conference finals. I don't know the scale at which they're going to make changes, but they seem like a team that is primed for either a significant consolidation trade or maybe even like kind of more of an overhaul than we're expecting right now.
The Morant side of it is really interesting, because I feel like I'm holding out longer than some on the whole, actually Jaren Jackson's their best player and most important player. I think that's probably right, that Jackson is that guy now, but because of what Morant can do on the ball, I still hold. But then I kept thinking, like, what if he's kind of more Stephon Marbury than, I don't know, someone better than that? What if it's like amazing highlights, but like kind of never won, and eventually he's going to bounce around as his athleticism leaves? Like, trading him, it would be like fascinating. I don't know what you could get for him, but like, you could really envision a scenario where Memphis gets better by moving him. I think that's totally possible. If you had to guess, do you think it's more likely that they go seismic and think about a Morant move, or it's, they bundle up a couple other guys and try to just get that wing that they haven't had, or something like smaller, I guess.
I think it's the latter because they were a team that was linked to Kevin Durant this season, and that John Morant, at least I wouldn't have expected John Morant to be involved in that deal. I will say it does what gets tough for them is that they're losing some of their best salary. I say some, but like Luke Kennard's an expiring contract. They did just get Marvin Bagley, so him expiring doesn't matter that much. But so if you're not like just losing even that $9 million from Luke Kennard, what are you going to step ladder your way to, I guess, is more so my point. So do you have to, if you're looking at a Kevin Durant or something that major, I guess Desmond Bane or John Morant has to be included then at that point.
Yeah.
And then I don't know is there a tier of salary down that because you couldn't even at this point, it would be tough for them to make the math, not impossible, be tough for them to make the math work if they just decided they wanted to be the Paul George team without including the Desmond Bane or John Morant salary based off what's on their books.
It's an increasingly prevalent problem, right? With just the mid tier, or just, I don't know, call it the non super duper star salary figures, the 20s and 30s that are really can facilitate a deal.
I would say they're fifth on the book, guaranteed money next year. Their fourth highest paid player is Brandon Clark at 12.5, and then John Conchar's fifth at 6.2.
Yeah, tough to get there. We should note that Zach Kleiman did basically come out and say, because some of the Morant chatter had risen in volume, basically said talk all you want, we hear it, but we're not trading him. Like that, which is even that made me think oh, they're gonna trade him because you don't come out and say that unless you I don't know, it's just probably being too cynical, but you know what I mean. The fact that he came out and did that, just don't say anything. Now my antenna are up even more.
He probably could have said something like John Morant was never available. Could you have made more pinpoint, targeted and said John Morant, we did not take any calls on John Morant this trade deadline or something, where then
and we certainly didn't call anybody about him.
Right.
You could be pretty direct, but it felt like a little protesting too much. It felt like a little overcompensation maybe from him.
Now, what would be this? Let's just say, I mean, even now, because we're doing a bunch of projecting here, what is the scale of move that you think makes it? Could you do, I'm not saying they'll make him available, but if he's healthy, does Herb Jones, is that someone that's okay? The Grizzlies feel like an actual title threat with him, or does it need to be a better, let's say maybe a more dynamic offensive player than that?
No. So I think there has to be a caveat, which is Ja Morant is healthy and at least, playing close to peak levels. Then Herb Jones is more than enough, I think, because that's just what they got to have. I mean, maybe you'd like it if he was a higher volume 3-point shooter, but that level of big wing defender that can guard guys that Ja can't, and that can guard guys that Bane, you don't want to use, on and up to your power forward, really, that would do it for me. I think, right? Do you think they need someone better than that?
I go back and forth because I still think one of their biggest problems is going to be their offense in the playoffs. And it's funny because as we're talking, we've seen their defense slip more than their offense, but just that first shot, half court offense, it's not gangbusters. And maybe that comes back to, you have to really believe in the John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. of it all. But I would almost wonder if someone like an Andrew Wiggins, who in theory provides more floor spacing, would do more for them in that capacity. But I don't think they need to be a Kevin Durant team to where do we need to give up Desmond Bane? Because would you give up, if you're the Grizzlies, I guess you have to give up Desmond Bane for Kevin Durant if push comes to shove. Are you giving up Desmond Bane for Paul George?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, for Durant, I would, but even that is kind of you got Bane on. Well, I think Bane's contract is still fine, but it's not a total, it's not a huge value, I don't think, anymore, is what maybe we thought that when he signed it too. I think ultimately, I believe that the Morant, Bane, Jackson trio, if healthy, I think that's enough. Now the evidence suggests it isn't, but I still have a pretty easy time putting my faith in them as okay, the offense with those three guys, and just non-zeros at the other two spots, in a closing lineup, that should be good enough. Doesn't it feel like that should be enough?
Yeah, it's just, they really, yes, I do feel like it should be enough. I'm with you there, but doesn't it feel like you need to be more particular about who is in those final two spots than maybe
Yeah.
you would with another type of starish trio?
So like if it weren't Herb Jones and it were Trey Murphy, like they're never going to get him. But then you're like, okay, we're like good. That's enough, like offensively for sure. But I think somewhere between those two guys would be fine. And even if it's Jones and if Jackson's at the 5 and you can find another, like if it's Cam Johnson, someone
They're a
like
good Cam
that, I
Johnson
think
team,
I
yeah.
think then I feel fine because I do still just believe those three guys should be good enough offensively to get away with it.
Do you know what I thought about when the John Morant, it wasn't even a rumor, and Howard Beck made that clear in his piece, like the executive speculating about John Morant's future. I don't actually know what this would solve, but in my head, I was like, what if Milwaukee called you and wanted John Morant, Edie, picks for Giannis because Giannis wanted out? Don't you almost have to do that? But then it's sort of
Yeah.
like you're upgrading like a situation that's kind of like, are you down? You're downgrading your half court creation. Giannis is a great passer. Okay, like he's really mid-range game really working this year for him. I think that's opened up his passing as well. You have to do it, but would you look at the Grizzlies and say, finish content like Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, Giannis, and then what is Scottie Pippen Jr. or Vince Williams Jr.? Like that's the de facto point guard there. I think you get enough playmaking out of Giannis and Desmond Bane to try it, but it'd be a weird situation, right?
I want to make clear I would try it, and I would be very interested in trying that.
Could you imagine Giannis and Jaren Jackson Jr. in the same front court?
It's hard to envision a compliment to Giannis that would be better than Jackson. I think it's no problem playing those two guys together.
Do you think the Grizzlies this is the way to frame it for them. Will they acquire a new player who's a part of their most used closing lineup next year? I'm going to manifest a yes. This could change, I guess, if they go deep in the playoffs, but I don't have the utmost confidence in this team as a playoff group.
I was going to say yes, no matter what. And it'll be an emphatic yes if, and this will be the way it goes south, they get into a playoff series and they can't score like that. Then it's just like, you've got no cover for running it back next year.
Now this is a dark horse that was forced on to the podcast. Kyrie Irving out for the season, torn ACL. Nico Harrison is convinced that in his 30s, he's going to come back better than ever from a torn ACL. Here's hoping that absolutely happens. They always, I guess, could have made this list, but their season's over. I mean, you could argue it was over from the moment they traded Luka Doncic, to be clear, but you're dealing with injuries to Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively II hasn't played in forever. Caleb Martin wasn't playing before you even traded for him. They should be tanking. Like, I guess my point is, what's the point of even bringing Anthony Davis back this year?
Don't do it.
If you're Anthony Davis, and I did mention this now by like we talked about it previously, by saying, isn't there a party that just wants to escape the specter of the Luka trade from being in Dallas? But now I'm just like, why do you want to stay there with because Kyrie, this injury, I would think it torpedoes at least a quarter of his season next year, right?
Oh, more than that. I think you write off next year. I really do. I think in terms of like good Kyrie, it's just I don't think you're going to get him.
So why does Anthony Davis want to be there right now then? Couldn't he come and say, like his leverage would be what it is when you look at his contract, but trade me. Yeah. I didn't have to be here. I mean, he did he waved his his trade kicker to be there, but I just don't like this. I'm not necessarily predicting it, but who is the player that is holding this team in place now?
I think the first thing you said, and it's one of the first thoughts I had after the trade, is like, Anthony Davis is in an impossible position. It's not his fault, but like he's the guy that's there now and Luka isn't. And that just carries with it such a weight that like, even before the Kyrie injury, I was just like, I would want out of there so fast if I were him. And like, apparently the relationship between him and Nico Harrison is powerful and like meaningful. And that's part of the reason he's there. But if like, then in that case, Nico should understand when Anthony Davis comes to him and says like, I can't be here. Like, this is unsustainable for me. And now, in addition to that, you have the whole like, well, next year's kind of a wash because Kyrie is going to miss most of it. And who knows how he's going to come back. So like, if you're Dallas, it would be indefensible, but they're already like nobody, everybody's as mad as they can be to pivot into, we're trading Anthony Davis to like replenish our draft store and start rebuilding, like, man, that would be brutal. But like, it almost feels like the right decision at this point. Don't you think? Like, because if the alternative is let's trade Davis for another really good player and he's just here by himself too, then like what's there? You don't get better that way.
I guess the issue is if you do that, you have no means to save face because you could have just gotten the haul that you're going to prioritize with Davis. You could have gotten more had you prioritized that haul with Luka Doncic, which I'm not saying this would have been acceptable. If you were trading Luka Doncic, that's what you should have been doing in the first place.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is like if the theory of targeting Davis in addition to Harrison and Pelinka had a good relationship and that's part why he went there. If the theory of targeting Davis was like, no, he's that good to where he's the central figure. And yeah, it'd be nice if Kyrie were there, but he's not like indispensable to the process because Davis is the core. We can build, a real contender around Davis as the number one guy, which by the way has just not ever been true. Like if that's the theory of it, then I still think Dallas belongs here because you're remaking a huge portion of the roster around him. Not the least of which is you need a primary ball handler because Kyrie will not be it for a large portion of next year. And I don't know where they go get that guy,
I guess, so they have this year's pick. They have next year's pick. Then they don't control the next four.
Mm-hmm.
They don't control 27, 28, 29, or 2030. I don't know. Like, I guess you do have the matching salary to go out and get somebody to do that. But they've been mentioned as a Kevin Durant destination. It just feels, I don't necessarily understand them doubling down on that. They could probably make the money work. And I guess you have the first round equity to make it work. I just don't even know if that makes me feel better about traveling down the more immediate path. It feels now with the Kyrie injury more so than anything, it just feels like post Luka should have always been a rebuild. There shouldn't be a post Luka era. Let me make it clear, but it should have been about a rebuild. Now it just feels like with the injury to Anthony Davis and his Mavs debut, the injury to Kyrie, just all the other stuff they've been dealing with, what is the other option? And I'd be a little bit surprised if they're the team that's able to get Kevin Durant. Maybe he wants to play with Kyrie Irving again, but you're going to have to, when you're looking at the salaries to get there, like that's going to take a pretty like bigger chunk of your rotation. Like we're not talking you trade two players and get Kevin Durant. You're trading three at least.
At least, right? And it's guys like, just to go down the salary list, like Thompson at almost 17, PJ Washington at 14, and Gafford at another 14. Like then you're in the neighborhood then. But like what does that leave? And if I'm Phoenix, I'm like, you're gonna need to give me Derek Lively. Like he's gonna have to be in the deal. It's brutal. I mean, you can't really trade Kyrie. I don't think like nobody's gonna.
That's what, an expiring contract. I guess.
Yeah, like as for a worse longer term deal. They will have to they should look different. But can't you imagine Dallas just coming back with like, well, we're gonna have Jaden Hardy on the ball and Max Christie looks really good, and with David back, we got three big guys. We can't play any of them together. Like they should look different. But who knows with this team now?
And the other thing that I didn't mention, if you are going to go, I don't know if it's a consolidation route or like we're going to trade assets to get, because they have, in addition, they have the Lakers pick in 2029. They can move as well. If you're going to trade for someone, giving up higher end assets, you then need to be sure, like they can't be redundant with Kyrie Irving. So it has to be someone that can play with him. So you're looking at either like a much bigger guard, or then it's like, well, we need more of a point wing at this point, and those aren't growing on trees themselves. And then it comes back to the salary thing, is like they also kind of need to be semi-cheap where it's a 2-for-1 rather than a 3 or a 4-for-1.
Right. Yeah. It's tough. The money's going to be tricky no matter how they structure it, I think. Sorry to include Dallas, but we didn't have a choice.
Look, their season ticket prices next year only going up 8%, Grant. So I don't really see what the big deal is.
It's a bargain.
That was an exercise. Those are the 10 teams that we went through. I don't think there was anyone. I went through the rest of the league and was kind of like, feels like Boston would still be a year away if we're going to get into financial constraints tear down. Atlanta could have been interesting because of Trae Young. He's going into the final guaranteed year of his deal before free agency. But they actually feel like they're actively building, just like, let's see if we can build a defensive monster around Jalen Johnson and Trae Young. Feels like the direction they're headed down. Any other team that would be an honorable mention for you?
Probably the Knicks. depending on what, if they get 6 or 7 first round picks back when they trade Mikal Bridges, that they'll probably look pretty different when they flip all those picks. But that's what they'll get, right? Somewhere in the neighborhood.
That comes with riding a high off a 12-point victory over the Knicks the night before we record this.
A little bit.
Could Miami look different just because they're like their picks are we don't even know if they're going to convey this year's, but if they don't convey this year's pick, it's almost incumbent on them to look different so that they can be good and not convey really good picks to other teams.
That, and you just have to obligatorily throw Miami in to the so-and-so star is available. Miami is among the pursuers, because they have as good a chance as almost anybody as just adding a huge name because that's what they seem to want to do.
And just the 2 final teams I mentioned, I was curious if you thought, could it be New Orleans if they end up winning the draft lottery? Would it just be like, let's trade Zion? He's playing well. Let's trade him now. And we're going to rebuild around Cooper Flagg and Trey Murphy.
It's for sure. I could see that. Isn't it just the whole, it's just the Zion thing in a nutshell where because he looks so good lately, you're like, hey, you can never trade this guy. Look how good he is. And it's like, this is when you should trade him. Do it now before anybody catches on or before he gets hurt again.
Before anybody catches on, we don't have 4.5 decades worth of evidence.
And nobody's quite up to speed on he's not super durable. So
there will be people who say OKC could make a consolidation trade. I think that'll always just be the case with the assets they have.
Yeah.
The one team that I think it would be worth talking about more so after we see them in the playoffs, Milwaukee.
Yeah.
What does Giannis says that they're going to have to drag him out of town if he ever leaves, but he's also said that he wants to be in a position to win and so that would just be a team. I'm not predicting it, but that because we didn't include them here. That's the team where it's I could see them looking a lot different depending on how the playoffs, maybe even Damian Lillard just says, this isn't it. With this for me, for the second year. So that's the team that's left that I feel like could be defined the most by what happens in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Among playoff teams, I'm hard pressed. I mean, Detroit, if Detroit just decides, hey, we did better than we thought in the playoffs, maybe, and then now it's time to make a decision on the Ivy, Duren, Holland, Thompson thing. We throw them in a deal for a more established current name. I'm not saying I would do that, but maybe those kinds of decisions get raised.
Yeah, I thought about Chicago too, but they're just never going to look a lot. And I don't even know what a lot different. Okay, if you trade Kobe White, that's one, but who else needs to go? Vooch isn't going to ruin a tank.
They're just going to extend Vucevic again. That'll be the big difference over the summer.
I did think about Toronto in the sense of just now they just have, we assume they're going to keep Brandon Ingram, but what if could you see them turn around and trade him for a Kevin Durant package or something?
How many times have we traded Kevin Durant today? I guess we have to because he's clearly going to get traded, but still.
I think that's it. The only other team, finally, just the Nuggets, but they have room beneath the apron next year. So it's just if they're gonna, with Christian Brown being extension eligible and Peyton Watson right behind him, it feels like we're a year away from them looking inward and saying one of the non-Jokic really high paid players needs to go.
Yeah, unless they get bounced really in an ugly way in the first round, and then it's Porter Jr. or maybe Gordon or somebody like that they start thinking about.
You ready to take us out of here?
Yep. Thanks everybody for listening, for watching. Remember, wherever you're getting your podcast, rate, review, subscribe there. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a comment. Give us your feedback on any teams we should have included. Any moves we didn't, discuss. I've just recalled because I think about these things. Tyus Jones is an unrestricted free agent, so maybe he'll affect Phoenix's outlook next year.
Well, he's not going to play anymore because Gillespie is now
he's out. Yeah, forget it. He's not going to have a job. What else? Join our Discord. Links for that in YouTube and podcast description. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Shouts, Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.